So thank you so much for coming. I am Heidi Huttner. I'm the Director of Sustainability Studies, and I'm very pleased to have all of you here. How many of you are from the Sustainability Studies program? Most of you are students, right? So from our class, welcome to others. We have a series of speakers all through the year. This is our second for the fall. We're going to have a film speaker series in the winter and a bunch of things happening in the spring, and a really great Hiroshima, Nagasaki nuclear history panel, which will be quite amazing in May. And if you are interested in being on our mailing list, if you aren't a student, if you're a student, you're always getting our blasts. But if you're not getting our blasts, let me know, and we'll put you on our email list. We have many wonderful events. So I'd like to introduce tonight Patti Wood, who's a dear friend and colleague, and she is the founder, along with her husband, of Grassroots Environmental Education. Patti and Doug do amazing things for New York State. They work on policy, they work behind the scenes with governments, they've done all kinds of anti-toxics regulation. They helped, we should be very thankful to them, along with some of our students actually were involved with this, which is really neat. They wanted to bring fracking waste to Suffolk and Nassau County and use it as de-icer on the roads. It's full of radiation and all kinds of toxic chemicals, really bad for our health. So this was a scary thing that most people didn't know about. Patti and Doug got behind that, worked with legislators in both counties, and got bills passed to stop that, which is really amazing. So thank you for that, and for many other actions. I could go on and on. They work in hospitals with families who have kids who have cancer and do all kinds of counseling with health and diet, and have written a great book to help those parents get through those cancer experiences. So Patti will talk to you about lots of stuff, and their website is fantastic for information from everything from cleaning products to redesigning your town. Greening your town is one of their projects. They have a radio show on Tuesday evenings, every other Tuesday at WBAI, with great speakers on a variety of environmental issues. I could go on and on. So, if you're interested, though, go to their website, Grassroots Environmental Education. And they're just a wonderful example of local grassroots activism. And you can see, when you go to that site, what's possible, what individual people who, their degrees are not in environmental areas, but they've, self-educated and just do incredible things. So I'm very pleased to welcome Patti, and thanks.
So after that introduction, I'm really tired. A little bit more tired than I was before. I really appreciate this opportunity. I love speaking to young people. They're like my target audience. And this is a kind of an intimate group, which is what I like, because if I'm talking about something that you have a question about, I really want you to just raise your hand so that we can talk about it, because I'm going to talk for about an hour, and you might forget if you have a question in like 5 minutes. But I want to also give special thanks to Dr. Heidi Huttner. She is a remarkable individual and an inspiring educator. I first lectured here at Stony Brook in Dr. Huttner's class on ecofeminism. I had to quick look it up to make sure I had it down, so before I got into that class. But I was mostly talking about the work of my nonprofit organization and some of the inspiring women who have done, incredible things, dedicated their lives to turning back the tide on this tsunami of harmful, potentially life-altering environmental exposure that we are all exposed to and that have seeped into the corners of our lives. And I'm going to just kind of scare you right up front, because I think that that's a good way to get you to listen. But we're actually living in a world today. This is such a unique time in history. We're living in this world that is at the same time developing new technologies in practically every industry faster than ever before, and losing what is critical to human life faster than ever before. The profound truth is that this is lost in a society that is prey to the all-powerful corporate drivers of our economy, because of course the economy is everything here in the United States of America. We buy their cell phones, their plastic packaged genetically modified food, their fracked gas, their bottled water, their toys, their drugs, their laundry detergents, their makeup, their air fresheners, their artificial turf fields, and their pink ribbons. And unless you read books written by Elizabeth Grossman, Or Bill McKibben, Deborah Davis. You may have heard of some of these authors and actually had the opportunity to hear them speak. Dr. Sandra Steingraber, Dr. Wargo, who is a good friend and whose book you are currently working with, and among others. But if you have not read these books, if you are not a part of the population that is actually reading this, then you're not getting the backstory and the information that you need to make informed decisions every single day. But then there's always the New York Times. So let's just talk about the New York Times. It was lying on my front lawn this morning, very quietly, wrapped in 2 plastic bags, which is another issue that I'm working on. But wrapped in these bags, and I took it apart, and I got the Times out. And in between the articles about Obama's trip to China and our one Ebola patient in New York City who was released from the hospital, he is free of that virus, and of course a huge divorce settlement, one divorce settlement that I couldn't even imagine, like billions of dollars. Some ex-wife is suing her husband, who is a fracking magnate, and we'll talk about that later. But what I found in the Times was interesting, and I don't know if any of you saw it, but on the op-ed page, which is usually where I go first, although I have to admit on Tuesdays I either go to the op-ed page or the Science Times, okay? And today's Tuesday. But on today's op-ed page, we have a thing called Making Chemistry Green. And for nearly 40 years, the Food and Drug Administration has wrestled with regulating chemicals triclosan and triclocarban. Anybody know what they are? They're chemicals that we use in disinfecting soap and in combs and shoes and sponges and pens and, the seats that you're sitting on and everything that you can imagine that the chemical company could actually sell, okay, to a manufacturer of whatever product. And it's interesting. So they're just saying, let's fix how we produce and regulate chemicals. Well, that's a big job because we have over 88,000 chemicals that have been registered with our Environmental Protection Agency in Washington, D.C. since World War II. Less than 2% of these 88,000 chemicals have even been tested for their toxicity. 3,000 of these chemicals are actually considered HPV chemicals, or high production volume chemicals. These are chemicals that are produced in excess of 1 million pounds each year. And as of 2011, only 200 of these HPV, or high production volume chemicals, were considered adequately tested, and 5 of them, 5, have been banned. And all the rest are floating around there, being used for consumer products, being used for industry, and we are being exposed. We did put together a Toxic Control Act. It was called TSCA, the Toxic Substance Control Act, in 1976. But it was really a complete failure. And it made really earnest and good politicians like Senator Frank Lautenberg, who has since passed on from New Jersey, to actually look at TSCA reform, or the Safe Chemicals Act reform. And he actually did this, introduced it, and it has gotten nowhere. So this lack of data leaves both scientists and policymakers in the dark about the toxicity of these thousands of chemicals that we are exposed to every single day. Now, going back to the New York Times, so that was Making Chemistry Green, and it was all about these 2 particular chemicals in disinfecting soaps and sanitizing products and so on, and how they are really harmful and how these 2 chemicals should be looked at very carefully. Well, we also know statistically that once a chemical has been brought up for regulation or for consideration, it takes approximately 14 years before they actually do anything about it, which is a little bit discouraging. Okay, so also in the New York Times today, in the gym, the air may be unfit. I've always been a proponent of exercise. I think it's great. I walk every single day. I actually rove every single day. I walk, I run, I jump, I do a bunch of things every single morning, walk up a really steep hill. And I think being outside in fresh air is like the best. But a lot of people spend time in gyms. How many of you go to the gym? Okay. So I've always been concerned about that because you have these gyms that are confined. They usually have no windows open. You've got synthetic carpeting in there with padding in that carpeting that's made of formaldehyde and other chemicals that are outgassing. Got a lot of plastic equipment that is outgassing. You have a lot of use of disinfectant products because as you use a piece of equipment, you're supposed to either disinfect it yourself or the next person does or the gym attendant does it or whatever. But so they're using chemicals all the time. Probably the triclosan that we were talking about on the op-ed page. Probably that very same chemical. So this is a chemical about how unhealthy gyms are from a chemical perspective. And they point out that when you're exercising that you're actually breathing more heavily so that you're actually taking in a higher percentage of these chemicals than you would if you were just sitting in that room. So there is concern about that. So now, let's see what else I found in the New York Times. If you look, you'll find it. Detergent pods pose risk to children, the study found. Detergent pods, I never even heard of them because I don't shop in regular grocery stores. But Tide and all these major manufacturers of cleaning products make these little things now. They're about this big and they're very colorful and they actually look like toys. And they're finding that 17,000 children just last year was poisoned by them. And 2 of them have died because they put them in their mouths. That protective coating that's on them, the kind of saran wrap type thing, disintegrates in their mouth. And that whole pod just kind of like explodes and they swallow it. So that's another piece. And then I love this from Business Day. This was really good, and this was actually last Saturday. New potato, hot potato. What does that mean? Okay, so now the U.S. approves modified crop. What is it? Modified crop. Actually, a new genetically modified crop, a new GMO. And the reason that the potato guys are going to get away with this is because they say, well, we're going to be reducing the amount of acrylamide in potatoes, in potato products like French fries and potato chips. How many of you eat French fries and potato chips? How many of you have ever heard of acrylamide? Acrylamide is one of the most toxic carcinogens, cancer-causing chemicals known to man. And it is actually formed naturally when you fry or bake or cook something at very high temperatures that is very high in carbohydrates. So not only is it found in potatoes, but it's found in bread. And when you toast your bread and it gets a little bit overdone and it looks a little black, toss it out. Don't eat it because you will be having quite a heavy dose of acrylamide when you eat it. Fries and potato chips are particularly high in acrylamide. This has been a real problem for the World Health Organization in Geneva, Switzerland, because they have recognized that acrylamide is a huge cancer threat worldwide and what to do about it because everybody eats carbohydrates. And a lot of these carbohydrate products are cooked at very high temperatures. So just think about it next time you eat a potato chip. Anyway, looks like we're going to get another GMO crop because they're going to say, well, we can try to make it so that it has a smaller quantity of acrylamide in it when it is cooked. Okay, so what do we really know about the world around us? Not much. I mean, as evidenced by me just asking how many of you do this and how many of you know it's dangerous. None. Okay? So there's a lot of stuff out there that we don't know. And people are just kind of, doing their thing, using their cell phones and eating junk food and drinking out of plastic containers and, feeding their children things that they probably shouldn't. But I'd like to talk about water very briefly. Drought. I just came back from California. Do you know what it's like in California? They have no rain. They have no rain, which means that their water supply is really, really low. And they're beginning to ration water in some places. That means that you can't water your lawn. You can't wash your car. They're going to start putting little meters on people's houses so that inside your home, your water use is going to be monitored. They have to do it because they're going to run out. We have a huge population, especially in Southern California where the greatest drought is. But there are other problems too. We have wars now, I call them wars, okay, between the fossil fuel industry and the agricultural industry. Because the fossil fuel industry out in California is fracking for both oil and gas, and it's a huge agricultural area. And they need water to irrigate their crops. But the oil and gas industry will pay more money to the water companies than the agricultural industry. Do we want food or do we want gas? These questions are going to become pretty magnified, okay, in your lifetime. We're going to have to start making choices about really important things that we think we need both. We need both of these things. So then we have contamination of our water. And it's really a good place here on Long Island to look at this carefully because we have way too many people living on this island. This island is basically a sandbar, and we get our water from a sole source aquifer, which means it is the only source of our water, and we're literally sitting on it. It is groundwater. We have 3 aquifers underneath Long Island. We have the upper glacial aquifer, we have the Magathy aquifer, and we have the Lloyd aquifer. The upper glacial aquifer is so contaminated from human contamination, from human pollution, that we no longer use it. We are getting most of our water from the Magathy. In some places where we've had saltwater intrusion, which means that we've overpumped in some of those wells near the shorelines, we are actually tapping into the Lloyd, which is the deepest aquifer and the purest water. So what's going on here in Long Island? Well, we have fewer people in Suffolk County than Nassau County, but we don't have sewer systems like Nassau County does. So everybody in Suffolk County has septic systems. You know what a septic system is? That's where all of our wastewater goes. Human waste, the waste from our washing machines, our dishwashers, our showers, our toilet, everything. It all goes into our septic system. And it's like this big tank, and the tank holds the solids, and the liquids drain out. And they go into our aquifers. That's just the way it is. So we've got too many people living in a space where, we can't sustain it here. We really can't sustain it. So we are having meetings. In fact, there's a meeting next week with the EPA and the DEC and a bunch of environmental organizations, the Suffolk County Water Authority, and we are meeting for the 3rd or 4th time. What are we going to do about this? What are we going to do about it? We can't just tell people you ought to move off the island. We have to think outside the box on this one. We really do. We have to think outside the box. In the really, really sensitive areas where we have, some coastal problems, real coastal problems, where the groundwater and the surface water meet, and we have shellfish beds that are being contaminated with nitrogen from human waste. The nitrogen that we have in our water comes from human waste, specifically urine. Urine is much higher in nitrogen than solid waste, and from fertilizers. The fertilizer contribution to our nitrogen problem here in our water is about 7 or 8%. It's not insignificant, but you can see how big the problem is with human waste. We have to think outside the box. My brother lived in Nova Scotia, right near a very, very beautiful cove called Peggy's Cove near Halifax. And anybody living within a quarter mile of the coast or the shoreline had to have a non-flush toilet system. So they had composting toilets and they had incinerlets. Incinerlet is an incinerating toilet. A family of 4 can use an incinerlet for half a year. You pull out a little tray about this big with ash in it every 6 months. None of that is going into the groundwater. It's pretty cool. But we're not thinking like that. We're Americans. We want to do what we want to do. We don't want people to tell us what to do, even though it would be better for us, better for our drinking water quality, better for our environment, and everything else. Chemical contamination, dry cleaners, gas stations. Those are the 2 big ones. Do you think we have more dry cleaners or more gas stations on Long Island? Dry cleaners. Way more dry cleaners than gas stations. And they use a chemical called perchloroethylene, or PERC, and that's commonly used for dry cleaning clothes, and it's a major groundwater contaminant because dry cleaners are not as careful as they should be. Legally, they're supposed to have a truck come to their establishment, their dry cleaning establishment, and take away the spent PERC, but sometimes they just dump it down the drain. It's cheap, it's easy, it's fast, and that's the way to do it, and it winds up in our groundwater. And then we have petroleum products coming from gas stations, and also just from cars. We have a tremendous problem with vehicular traffic on Long Island, and it actually is impacting our water quality, not just our air, because whatever goes up must come down. And pharmaceuticals. Do you ever think about that? We have pharmaceutical contamination in surface waters and groundwaters all over the world. You're taking a prescription medication, it goes through your body, into the toilet, into the wastewater system, and into the groundwater. We're finding heart medications, chemotherapy drugs, hormones, antibiotics, antidepressants, mood stabilization drugs, and sometimes in biologically active amounts in our drinking water supply. This is all stuff that we really need to think about. I mean, we are really living in a mess. So what do? We just talked about thinking outside the box. We don't have this luxury of making incremental changes right now. We need to make big changes, which is why we're talking to the EPA, why we're talking about billions of dollars in infrastructure improvement, taking the areas of Suffolk County which are really, really in trouble and actually putting in sewer systems. Sewer systems are expensive, but sewer systems are where everybody's waste goes into a central place. It goes through a sewage treatment plant, hopefully a tertiary plant, where they're actually, doing a pretty good job of removing, pathogens and certain chemicals and heavy metals and nitrogen and so on, and then it gets dumped out into our bays, the Long Island Sound, and the Atlantic Ocean. That's actually what they wanted to do with fracking waste. And I think Dr. Huttner mentioned it, but I'm going to get into fracking because fracking is kind of like the last gasp of the fossil fuel industry. We've kind of, gone down there and we've just drilled, and, taken out a lot of oil. Now we're drilling offshore. Now we're trying to squeeze oil out of the sands, the tar sands up in Canada. And what we're doing with the gas that is still left down there, so we're actually using this process called hydrofracking. Now, it's called slick water horizontal hydrofracking because what happens is that they go down about a mile and then they go out horizontally, right in the middle of the shale. Now, what is this shale? Well, let's talk about it. About 400 million years ago, during the Devonian era, we had a shallow inland sea or ocean. And in that sea, we had a lot of marine life, including sea lilies and squid and plankton, and there was not much oxygen in the water. So when they died, all of these corpses actually fell to the bottom of the oceans and decayed. The Acadia range of mountains during that period of time actually also eroded into these oceans and formed the Marcellus Shale. Now, the Marcellus Shale underlies Ohio, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, and New York State. The very, very rich shale. There's a lot of gas to be had from this shale. Now, back in 1821, New York State drilled the first gas well. It was near Fredonia, upstate New York. They literally went down, a couple hundred feet, stuck a straw down there and sucked up the gas. There were these big pockets at that time of gas. And so that was the way we extracted gas for years and years and years, almost an entire century. And then we depleted that supply. And so now Dick Cheney, remember Dick Cheney? Halliburton Corporation. Okay, then he became vice president. Lucky him. Not lucky us. His company actually developed this hydrofracking industrial process. So they go down, like I said before, about a mile, sometimes more, right into the shale. They send down explosives so they actually shatter the rock or the shale. And then they send down this unbelievable combination of water, millions of gallons for each well, which they're taking out of our water cycle. This is water that we would ordinarily use to be showering in and drinking, but they're actually taking this out. Each well that they each well that they drill uses millions of gallons of water. So down it goes, along with silica sand, and this sand now is being mined out in the west. And silica is a very, very fine sand, and it is used to actually hold open the fractures or the cracks that they have made in the rock. And then they have this water, okay, and then they have chemicals. And these chemicals do all kinds of things that are necessary for this industrial process. Some of the chemicals are biocides, many of them are petroleum products like benzene and toluene and so on, but many of them are just literally hazardous waste products from some other industry. They buy toxic chemicals off the plastics industry, okay, and off other toxic industries like fertilizer industries and so on. Okay, so now we have all this stuff that goes down there, and what's happened now is we have opened up this rock. We have all these fissures or these cracks, and these little bubbles, these remaining bubbles of methane that are actually contained in the rock begin to flow into the cracks and then back up the well bore. And along with that comes up back some of the water, some of the chemicals, but also other things that are in that rock, including a very, very high amount of brine, because remember, this was an ocean, and oceans are salty. And when you have a high brine content in a shale formation, it almost always goes hand in hand with radioactive materials. And the radioactive materials that we're finding in the Marcellus Shale are radium-226, radium-228, and their breakdown product, which is radon. And that's all coming back up the well bore along with the gas. So they separate out the gas, they burn it off, the excess gas, until they can get a good, steady, and controllable flow by burning it off. Okay, it's called flaring. The flaring operations sometimes take between 1 and 2 weeks, so you have constant flaring. It sounds like a jet engine. I'm not kidding. We've actually been to a well pad where they were actually flaring. It's the most incredible sound. You can't hear anyone speaking around you. And then they take that wastewater that's come back up, which is full of these chemicals and this brine and this radioactive material. And in places like Pennsylvania, they actually store it in these open pits. So you have these open evaporation pits. Or they take it to other places like Ohio, and they send it down under very high pressure into these deep injection wells. Now, these deep injection wells are causing seismic activity in places where they never had seismic activity before. And maybe you've read about that. But we're beginning to see earthquakes happening in places around the country where this has never happened before. And that's because we're pushing this waste product from the fracking operations back down into the earth. The other thing they do with it is they put it on our roads, which Heidi talked about. They spread it on roads because it has a high brine content, so it's really good for de-icing. And the oil and gas industry are offering it for free to these small municipalities that have very limited budgets, and we've had some pretty hard winters, and so free de-icing material is very attractive. Okay? So they spread it on roads, and they put it through wastewater treatment plants. And what happens when you take this heavy brine, heavy chemical laced water, and you put it through a wastewater treatment plant? You actually can corrode the pipes that are in the plant. You can actually kill off the biologicals that they're using in the plant to break down pathogens. I mean, it can really destroy a multi-million-dollar wastewater treatment plant. And the other thing they like to do with it is to offer it to landfills. And they pay a premium to put that waste in landfills. Just last week, we were working with Chemung County. They had a closed landfill. And the oil and gas industry from Pennsylvania came up and said, you know what, we'll give you X amount of dollars to expand this landfill. We'll work with the DEC to get them to open up the landfill again and expand it so we can bring the waste from Pennsylvania up to New York to your landfill. And we worked with them really hard on a public education campaign, but money talks. Money talks, and this is a tough thing to understand, but it's really, really true. So we have no idea where that's going, but it doesn't look good. So even though New York State is not fracking, thanks to Governor Patterson, who made an executive order when he was in office and said you cannot frack in New York. We're going to put a moratorium on this until we know more about the environmental and human health impacts. We are still getting the waste from Pennsylvania, except on Long Island and in 14 other counties where we've worked very, very hard for them to pass laws saying we will not accept any fracking waste in any form for landfills, for wastewater treatment plants, for road spreading, or even as a component, because the gas industry is now selling it they dehydrate it, and they're selling it as a component of consumer-grade de-icing material that you could be putting on your sidewalk or your driveway. Okay, so people living near these fracking sites, what's happening to them? Well, it's a pretty heavy-duty industry. There's a lot of chemical contamination. There's a lot of contamination of their wells, their drinking water, and we're finding people who have chemical burns on their body, all over their body, just from showering in this water. A lot of neurological problems we're seeing. We're seeing a lot of people unable to sleep, terrible headaches, inability to concentrate, respiratory problems, gastrointestinal problems. Many people have basically just left these areas. You will actually find communities in Pennsylvania that are completely abandoned because their well water is so contaminated they can no longer live there. Then, of course, we have leaseholders, people who have leased their land to the gas industry, and if they get enough money, they also walk out. They just take the money and run. So it's a pretty intense thing that's going on. We actually were funded by the Park Foundation to do a film about the food system in New York State and how it would be impacted by hydrofracking if we allowed it in this state. So the first thing we did was to go upstate and to interview some farmers. First one we interviewed was a dairy farmer. And she said, you can look at my 400 head of dairy cattle here, my herd, and understand that 80% of their milk is the water that we get from our well here, because those cows drink that much water, and so their milk is made from that water. 80% of milk is water. Think about that. Think about where your milk comes from. Hopefully it came from a place where they had clean water, right? Because most of that milk you're drinking is whatever water those cows were drinking. And we actually talked to people who were devastated, who were in the middle of lawsuits because they actually didn't sign leases. The guys came knocking at their door to sign a lease so that they could drill on their land, and they said no. And then all of a sudden, a lease showed up in their mailbox, signed by them. Well, how did that happen? Well, the gas industry has access to all of the records, all of the town records. They go down to the town hall, and they have their cell phones, and they can take pictures of your signatures. And so they just sign your signatures on leases. Pretty interesting. So there's a lot of legal action going on upstate, and there's just so many problems. We talked to vineyard owners, who are really upset because the New York State wine industry is really, really growing fast, and it's become a really big source of entertainment, really, for people. I mean, this is what they do. They go upstate and they go to all the vineyards, and just like we do out here on the North Fork. You go to the vineyards and you do wine tastings, and a lot of tourist money is being poured into upstate because of the vineyards. And all of those vineyards are at risk if they frack in New York State. Seneca Lake, which is part of the Finger Lakes, has a very interesting problem. They have these salt caves under the lake, salt caverns, that people have actually dug out. They've dug out the salt and sold it. It was part of a big industry in that area. And now the gas industry wants to actually store gas in those salt caverns underneath the water, which is the drinking water source for about 10,000 people. A lot of stuff going on. So how about moving it? Once you get the gas up, and then you need pipes. You need pipes to move that gas. And once that gas gets into the pipes, and it goes a couple of miles, then it needs a compressor station to keep pushing it along. Gas doesn't just go on by itself, so you need these compressor stations to keep pushing it, and regulatory stations, and metering stations, and all of these stations release toxic chemicals, including the methane, which is the natural gas. So you have this problem with these pipelines, and they're extremely explosive. Natural gas is extremely, extremely flammable. So there's a huge fight right now in Westchester County, home of the Indian Point nuclear power plant. Within 1,200 feet of that plant is an existing pipeline, and the gas industry wants to expand that pipeline, actually replace that pipeline with a 42-inch pipeline to move gas across Westchester, across Connecticut, up to New England, and into the Canadian Maritimes, and then store it in an LNG terminal off the Maritimes and export it. You can get up to 10 times the amount of money in Asia for that gas than you can get here. That's really where all this gas is going. This isn't about America's energy future. This is about the oil and gas industry making a ton of money. When I keep saying the oil and gas industry, they're actually also fracking for oil, not just gas, but they're using the same process to frack for oil in California and places where they have a lot of oil. So there we have these compressor stations, these big pipelines. I don't know if you heard about the explosion in Harlem. That was a couple of years ago, where 8 people were killed and 48 people were injured in that explosion. That was an 8-inch pipeline. We're talking about a 42-inch pipeline. This is unprecedented, the size of this pipe. It's unprecedented. We just don't know what would happen with a pipeline that big, with this huge amount of gas being pressed through this pipe. And what about something happening to it so close to the Indian Point nuclear power plant? We'd have a fire that would burn forever. And on that particular site, at that nuclear power plant, we have a lot of stored spent fuel. You know, a lot of nuclear power plants don't store as much fuel as we do at Indian Point, but we store a lot of spent fuel there. So there are people who are working on this part of it too, and it's a huge, huge problem. Okay. Food. We talked a little bit about GMOs. This could be my entire lecture about food, but it's a really important issue today. Very few of us are eating the way our ancestors ate, which is local, seasonal, organic, food, grains, vegetables, fruits, proteins that they get from fishing or raising chickens or cattle or pigs. We don't do that anymore. All of our food comes in these prepackaged, measured amounts, okay? And it's all processed foods. It really does not resemble the original food that it was made from. But that's what we're eating. That's what we're feeding our bodies now. It's really important to understand that every time you put something in your mouth, you are either supporting your immune system, which means keeping you healthy, or you are destroying your immune system and putting yourself at risk for all kinds of acute and long-term health problems. We have huge issues in this country with obesity and diabetes and cancer and arthritis and heart disease, and it goes on and on and on. Why do you think that is? This is really new. I mean, Dr. Huttner mentioned that, I've written this book for parents of children with cancer and other life-threatening illnesses. And that's because there are so many children with cancer. I mean, we never saw children with cancer. 50 years ago, it was really unusual. Childhood leukemia, maybe. But now it's everything. I mean, you have children who are born with cancer. They have all the same cancers that adults have. Liver cancer and soft tissue sarcomas and leukemias and lymphomas and brain cancers and, kidney cancer, bladder cancer, bone cancer, goes on and on and on. This is a chronic disease. How could you be born with it? Something's going on. Something's going on that's really, really wrong. A lot of it is our food supply, but it's also the water we're drinking, the air we're breathing. The thing that bothers me about this little book that I wrote is that we've distributed it to most of the pediatric cancer hospitals in the country. We gave them 500 copies and 250 copies and 300 copies, 1,000 copies. And now they're all out and they're all like, can we have more? And why is that? Because there are more kids. There's been a 1% increase in childhood cancer every year for the past 25 years, so 25% increase. 1 in every 5 kids has a neurobehavioral problem, ADD, ADHD, dyslexia, autism. The highest rates of autism are in New Jersey. 1 in 45 boys in New Jersey is autistic. I mean, that diagnosis is not just devastating for this child who will never reach their full potential, but the entire family. I know parents will call me and say, what are we going to do? We have 3 autistic children. What's going to happen when we die? Usually a sibling will take responsibility for, their brother or sister who's autistic. But what happens when they're all 3 of them are autistic? Who's going to take care of them? It's going to be an enormous burden on society. It's going to be a huge population of adults with autism. And they have the same lifespan as we do. They don't have a shorter lifespan. So we have all these autistic adults, people who can't live on their own. Somebody has to take care of them. It's huge. Where's it coming from? Whoops. We have one thought. Wireless radiation. How many of you have cell phones? Me too. I have one of those horrible ones, those little clamshell phones. I call it a dumb phone. RFR, or radio frequency radiation, was a really, really cool discovery. Okay? It actually brought things into people's homes that they couldn't have even imagined. The inaugural speech of a new president, the London Philharmonic, Comedy Hour, the news. It was unbelievable. And it was great, and it was not a risk. We were actually receiving radio waves from a tower, could be, 50 miles away. It was an unbelievable discovery, and it really, really helped us. But then we discovered this technology, and the wireless industry jumps on it, where we can actually put powerful transmitters as well as receivers. Those were just receivers, and now we are transmitting. Literally, right here, at our heads, we're transmitting this two-way communication and the increased radiation that is necessary to support it is a huge reason for concern right now. I mean, it's crazy. If you look at your little manual that you get with your new phone, every time you upgrade to the new phone, which is actually more powerful and more risky, okay, just look at the warning page. It'll say, do not hold this against your head. Keep this away from your body. Do not hold it on. Do not put your laptop on your lap. Why call it a laptop? Okay, do not do that. Don't do that. It's amazing what we have found. And we are now working with Dr. Hugh Taylor, who's at Yale Medical School. He's the head of reproductive sciences and OBGYN. We're working with Deborah Lee Davis from the National Academy of Sciences and Martha Herbert, who's at Harvard. All of these people doing unbelievably important research on wireless radiation. You can call it microwave radiation, wireless radiation, RFR radiation, radio frequency radiation, anything you want, it's all the same thing. In this country, and in this country only, of all the other countries in the world, we only look at the health impacts of this type of radiation that have to do with the thermal exposure. In other words, how close do you have to get to a transmitter before your skin burns? That's it. Every other country is actually looking at the biological effects, the DNA strand breaks, the carcinogenic potential. We're swimming in this radiation. I'm sure that this room is wireless, right? I'm sure that there is a transmitter in this room. In those little boxes, the little router boxes that you have in your house or in your dorm or in your classrooms, are antennas. They look like this, okay? And each one of these antennas is sending out a beacon signal. A beacon signal is like a lighthouse signal. It goes 360 degrees. It's sending out a beacon signal so that you can actually grab that signal and you can transmit and you can receive constantly. If you're in a row like this, you are getting the most radiation if you've all got your wireless devices on, because you're not only getting yours, but you're getting it from either side of you as well. So what we have done, and this is really interesting because we didn't think that we were going to get such a positive response so quickly and without so little effort. I mean, really amazing. We went to Suffolk County and we said, how'd you like to be the first county in the United States to actually indicate the location of wireless routers in all of your county buildings so that pregnant women might actually take some precautions and get as far away from that router as possible? Now, why do we do this is because Hugh Taylor at Yale University, who I just told you about, found that the prefrontal cortex of the offspring of exposed pregnant mice was different from the control group that were not exposed. And the offspring exhibited behavior like ADD and ADHD. And Martha Herbert, her experiments show autistic tendencies. Interesting. So we thought, okay, you know what? Pregnant women are already a different animal. We've got men, women, and pregnant women. Pregnant women don't eat tuna fish sandwiches because it's got mercury in it, and they're careful about that. Pregnant women don't smoke. Pregnant women don't drink a lot of alcohol. They're different. We already have this different idea of they should be taking real precautions here because they're carrying this baby that's developing inside them, very vulnerable. So man, they jumped on it. They wrote a resolution without us even going in. I mean, we sent them all the information and the science, and we just said, hey, how about it? Want to do it? They were all over it. So we called NYSUT, New York State United Teachers, which is the largest teachers union in the country, New York State teachers. And we said, let's just talk about your pregnant teachers in the school classrooms, because in this country we think that if you don't have access to the internet, then you're never gonna succeed academically. I mean, I live in a house where I have the internet. I don't have a wireless router. We have Ethernet cables. They're faster. It works perfectly. I have 6 Ethernet cables in the kitchen, family room, my office, my husband's office, the bedroom, carry our computers wherever we want, just plug in. Done. Access, no problem. No radiation exposure either. So now we've got NYSUT and Suffolk County really excited about this. So I'm speaking at a conference at Saratoga Springs for the New York State Teachers Union about this issue. They want to protect their teachers. And my thought was, what profession would know so profoundly the impact of having a neurological problem or a learning disability. What profession would know that more profoundly than a teacher, than teachers? None. They're sitting in these classrooms with kids that have special assistants that are pulled out all day long for special classes in this or that because they can't learn. Really interesting. So we have some suggestions. You can actually go to this website, which is called babysafeproject.org. But these are some of the things that we have told people that we think they should do. Avoid carrying your cell phones directly on your body. Don't carry it in a pocket. Don't carry it in your bra. Avoid placing your cell phone, wireless laptop, or tablet on your abdomen. Don't talk or text while holding a phone against your body. Don't put it in your pockets, guys. We see a lot of sperm abnormalities from microwave or RFR exposure. Avoid using your cell phone in cars, trains, or elevators. Why is that? Because that's where we like to use them, right? Because those are Faraday cages. You're sitting in the middle of a Faraday cage and you've got this radiation bouncing off these 4 metal walls. And who's absorbing that radiation? Your little body. Your whole body absorbing it. Avoid using cordless phones. You know what a cordless phone is? It's got a base, phone. You can pick it up and walk around with it. Sometimes you have these at home. It's the same exact thing as a cell phone, except it's worse because you have a tower, a small transmitting tower in the base. Don't ever have one of those next to your bed because all night long you're sitting next to a little antenna. It's crazy. You stream your videos and games because that results in higher RFR exposure. So stream them when you're away from them and then put your devices on airplane mode. Completely harmless. When you're on airplane mode, no radiation. You're basically turned off. You've turned that off. You're disconnected from Wi-Fi. Whenever possible, connect your wired cables to a router or modem and turn off the Wi-Fi feature on the router. In other words, every night, please, when you go to sleep, if you have a router and you know how to do this, just turn it off. Just like you lock your doors, you turn off your lights, turn off the router so you don't sleep with it all night. And that's it. And it's interesting that the insurance industry will not insure the wireless industry. Nope. The insurance industry will not insure the wireless industry because they know what's coming. It's going to be bigger than tobacco and asbestos put together. We are already seeing an enormous number of people with what we call electromagnetic hypersensitivity. These are people who have headaches. These are people who can't concentrate. They can't sleep. They literally feel physically sick. They're unable to be in a room where there are wireless devices or where there's a router. And it is happening in Sweden at such an enormous rate because the Swedes were the first to embrace this technology, right? Nokia? Yeah? And so we've got thousands of Swedish people living in the wilderness because they can't live in cities or neighborhoods where there are cell towers and routers and wireless places like hospitals and libraries and places of business. They've literally walked away from society so that they can function. And there's one place like that in the United States. It's in West Virginia. There's an 80 square mile radius around a satellite transmitter. And you're not allowed to have cell phone towers or wireless routers or anything in that 80 square mile space in West Virginia. And so people who are electromagnetically hypersensitive in this country are flocking to West Virginia. It's really interesting. That's one problem. The other problem is an increase in meningiomas and gliomas, brain tumors, acoustic neuromas, also a brain tumor, but a tumor of the acoustic nerve. Parotid gland tumors, these are tumors right underneath the ear. This is a salivary gland, quite big, the size of an egg, right underneath here. Thyroid cancers and eye tumors. Just the way it is. I mean, it's happening. We are just seeing an uptick in all of these types of cancers from holding cell phones against the head. whenever you're using a wireless device, just think one thing. Proximity is everything. The further away you are from it, the safer you are. Don't use wireless devices up close. Do not put them against your head. I could go on and on about that too, but let's not. Okay, plastics. I love it. Look at all those plastic wrapped things. Isn't it great? Okay, and the styrofoam cup. Do they still serve coffee and tea on this campus in styrofoam? Isn't it amazing? They don't? No styrofoam cups anywhere? Yes? No? We've done that? Great. Okay, because styrofoam is made from polystyrene. Polystyrene is a known human carcinogen. And the styrene actually leaches out of styrofoam cups when there's warm liquid in them. And that makes a lot of sense, right? Because we use styrofoam cups for warm liquids. They're cheap. That's why we use styrofoam, because it's really, really cheap. Let's just look at the water bottle. That bottle there, right there, represents two fairly unregulated industries in this country: the bottled water industry itself and the plastics industry. Bottled water industry, there are very few regulations. The regulations on the public water supply that you're getting here at the university is actually stricter than it is for a bottled water company. Much of the water that you buy in bottles, unless you're buying something that has been triple filtered, distilled, purified using reverse osmosis, and these things will all be on the label. You can actually look for those things. Will just be water from another municipal water supply, maybe in Pennsylvania or in Massachusetts or somewhere. It's not well regulated. The other problem with it is the plastic, because the plastics industry is not well regulated. We know that there are certain plastics that we should always avoid. One of them is styrene, okay, polystyrene. The other one is polycarbonate, which contains BPA, which you may have heard about. Let's just see. And the other one is PVC, which the duck is representing. That's polyvinyl chloride. I always say that plastic is the smelly plastic. You can really smell something that's made out of PVC. A lot of sports equipment is made out of PVC. You buy a new ball or you buy new guards or whatever, and it stinks. And you really got to do yourself a favor and just literally wash it well and then put it out in the sun, because it will outgas. And you need to do that before you actually kind of put those things on your body or put them in your room where you're smelling them, all night long and so on. PVC is polyvinyl chloride, another known human carcinogen. Okay, so, and then this is also PVC, this wrapping on all of these vegetables and fruits and so on. It's that thin wrap, saran wrap or whatever. It's also made from PVC. These plastics actually contain plasticizing chemicals that will leach into the food. Sometimes you can taste it. Who's ever tasted bottled water that tastes a little bit off, has a funny taste to it? It's from the plastic, not from the water typically. So we shouldn't actually be eating or drinking out of plastic, period. It's just, it's one of those unknowns. But let's just go to BPA for 1 second, which would be maybe found in a bottle, but more likely found in a reusable bottle. A reusable bottle like a sports bottle. It would also be found in every single can, whether it's a metal food can or it is an aluminum beer can, beer or soda can. They're all lined with BPA, all of them. You can't find a can in the United States that does not contain BPA. What's BPA? Bisphenol A. Okay, it's a hormone. It was originally developed as a hormone to be actually used as a pharmaceutical agent. But they found that it was also very good as a building block for certain plastics. And it would also line a can so that if you put something like tomatoes or pineapple or whatever in that can, that the food would not take on the taste of the can. So now we have all this BPA, which actually leaches very, very readily into all that food. So I always say drink and eat out of china and out of glass. They make glass bottles today with silicone wraps on them that you can get at Whole Foods Market and other places that are really, really safe for using for water bottles and sports bottles. BPA is one of those chemicals that is a hormone-disrupting chemical. It was originally made as a hormone, but a hormone-disrupting chemical is really, really interesting because the smaller amount you are exposed to, the more dangerous. With most chemicals, the exposure has something to do with the toxicity. And if it's a large exposure, it's more toxic. Not in the case of endocrine-disrupting chemicals. Because what happens is that when you have a large exposure to this, you will actually destroy a cell. If you have a small exposure, you will mutate a cell or damage a cell, which will then replicate as a damaged cell. Which is why endocrine disruptors are really, really an area of research that is ongoing and very much at the top of the list of most of our environmental health researchers. It's really something that we are seeing having an impact, especially on baby boys. A lot of reproductive problems with sexual organs, as well as cancers of those same organs. And this is basically coming from a mother's exposure to BPA or a related substance during pregnancy. See what else I got here. Air pollution. Okay, so we're living in an area of the country that is what we call a non-attainment area, which means that we are not meeting a certain standard that has been put forth by the federal government according to the Clean Air Act. And it's on Long Island, particularly due to vehicular traffic. Once again, too many people in a small place. And we all drive cars. I drove a car here. We all drive cars. Public transportation really doesn't exist. I mean, if you want to go from Stony Brook to Riverhead or from Stony Brook to Manhasset, how would you get there other than in a car? It could take you half a day if you wanted to take the bus system, right? It could take you a long time to get somewhere if you take the public transportation system that we have here on the island. That has to end. Public transportation has to be cleaner, faster, and more available to people in more areas of the island so that it works better. But this is typical Long Island traffic, and that's typical New York City. Although Los Angeles is even worse. It was so bad. I was in California last week, and it's just unbelievable, the pollution. And that's also vehicular traffic. I mean, it took me 3.5 hours to drive across Los Angeles. And without traffic, it would have taken me 20 minutes. 3.5 hours. That's how much traffic there is. It's crazy. We talked a little bit about food. These happen to be some vegetables that we grow at a small farm in Port Washington. We have a historic property. It was an old farm that was actually built in 1721, and we have just kind of taken on that property and turned it into a small farm. We grow vegetables through the local food kitchen. So that's actually about 3 weeks ago what we delivered to them: tomatoes, Swiss chard, cucumbers, zucchini. It's a good thing. So what can we do about this? Well, one of our employees over there, I took her picture in the store, read labels. Read labels wherever you go. When you're looking at personal care products, you want to look for labels that have the fewest number of ingredients. If you've got more than 20 ingredients, then don't even look at it. Okay? And you want to avoid anything that has a fragrance in it. Fragrances are chemicals, and they're really toxic chemicals because they contain phthalates, which are other toxic chemicals, but they make fragrances last. Who's ever walked around a neighborhood or walked around the campus and smelled somebody's dryer vent that has bounce in it? You know what bounce is? It's that little dryer sheet that people use in their clothes to make them soft. It's just like that. It's so incredibly toxic. It's amazing. It's amazing to me that people don't understand that. It's not actually making your clothes soft. It's actually putting a greasy film, an oily film. It's made from petroleum. It's So it's actually putting an oily film on the fabric so it feels soft, but it's toxic oil. And it's a fragrance that has phthalates in it, and those phthalates are highly, estrogenic and toxic, and those things last forever. I mean, you can't get it out of your clothes. Once it's in your clothing, it's there forever. So read labels, use simple things, wash your house with, really hot water, lemon juice, white vinegar. It's an easy thing to do, or buy really simple products that are bio-based. What's a bio-based product? Anybody know? What does it sound like? No hands? Bio-based product? A bio-based product is a product that is actually made from something from the earth, minerals, marine products, botanical products, plants, and so on. So that when you use those products, which are in many cases as effective, if not more effective, than their chemical cousins, when it actually goes down the drain, it will have no impact on the environment either. So it has no impact on the earth when you are manufacturing it, or on the environment when it's being manufactured. It has no impact on the user of it, and it has no impact when it goes down the drain and goes back to the earth, whether it gets dumped in the water or it gets dumped on the land. And so look for bio-based products. They're there. They really are there. There are really good manufacturers that are trying to do the right thing. And so just look for them. Stop buying this stuff that's made by, Procter and Gamble and, Tide and all that stuff that's been around forever. It's all made from petroleum products. And what's petroleum? It's oil, fossil fuel. Our worst players, most toxic players in this whole environmental health are all made from fossil fuels. Pesticides are made from fossil fuels. Cleaning products from fossil fuels. Personal care products. Plastics are made from fossil fuels. All this stuff. Okay, and wait a second, this other one, this is a voting booth. How many of you voted in the midterm election? All right. Could you vote on campus, or did you have to go somewhere else? Yeah? You made an effort to vote. Everybody made an effort. Good. It's really important. Okay, and then this was an anti-fracking rally in Albany. A lot of people were there. Okay? And it's one of the reasons that New York State has still not given the green light to the gas industry to frack in our state, because of all of these people who basically, left their jobs for a day, took a day off, took a personal day, brought their kids with them, and went to Albany and said, no, we don't want you to do this. And this will continue, and hopefully many of you will get involved in some way on this issue as well. It's one of the biggest issues that we are dealing with today. I know Dr. Huttner is working on nuclear radiation because it's huge. We had that tsunami, the Fukushima disaster, which is still impacting us today. Japan was obviously and is still being, incredibly impacted by that disaster. But that radioactive material has gone into the Pacific Ocean, and the Pacific Ocean actually winds up on the California coast and is having an impact on marine life and on marine life that we eat. So think about that next time you order sushi. Nothing is away. That's one of the things that a lot of people talk about. There is no away. There was a great guy named Barry Commoner, Dr. Barry Commoner, who actually ran for president of the United States, and his presidential campaign slogan was "Put a commoner in the White House." I thought that was so clever and really not a bad idea. Not a bad idea. But he was a scientist. Scientists don't become presidents, but it would have been great for us. It would have been great for our country to have somebody who really understood these issues. Because most politicians just don't have a clue. It's really important that you all just learn enough to protect yourselves and your families, and so that you can have an impact on schools and your community. And, if you do it right there, where you have control, it's an enormous success. enormous success, and we all have that responsibility now because we're not living in a place where where we can take those chances anymore. Any questions? Do I have anything else to say? Yeah, let's see. That's it. Sunflower from my garden. Okay. Yeah. Yes, I would love to.
Great. So, anyone who's want to ask questions, Patti has a wealth of information, and we'll have questions, and then we'll take a little break, and then we're going to move into workouts for those who are in our class. So let's take questions from the audience. So, anyone want to ask anything? Yeah.
Well, I just want to get you guys a recording too.
No, we're not connecting to satellites. Okay, we are connecting to wireless networks basically that have been set up, and we do have cell phone towers. Our cell phones connect to the towers, but then all of our other devices that we use are connecting to a router. Okay, a wireless router. Remember, I said that they have antennas inside them with these beacon signals on them. And many people are using their cell phones also as their computers. So in that case, their cell phones are also connecting to those routers. The radiation is just pervasive. I mean, it's right now as we're speaking, I know people who actually couldn't have attended this lecture because there is so much radiation. If you just walked outside on the campus, if you could actually see this wireless radiation or microwave radiation, it would just look like, you'd be going like this through spaghetti, just trying to find your way through it. It's one of our problems with environmental exposures. You can't see it, you can't feel it, you can't hear it, you can't taste it. It's just there. And radiation is one of the most problematic because of that. We just have to be very careful. There are ways to use all of these devices safely today. There's no reason that we shouldn't have access to the internet and to all the things that we're doing, but we can hardwire that. And there are some places where they are actually doing that today, particularly in France. They literally have pulled wireless routers out of schools and out of public libraries, and they've hardwired those libraries, which is the way it used to be. Before we had wireless, we had hardwired Ethernet cables. Absolutely. The solution to be, if you want to be completely safe, you use a regular telephone that's a landline. That has one of those little wires on it, cords like the one that I have in my house. You plug it into your wall. Landlines are completely safe.
Other questions? Good question. Ask anything. It's an incredible opportunity to talk to plastics, everyday hair, a lot of products we didn't get into, but feel free to ask anything.
There's a question over there.
Yeah, I just wondered how you felt with the use of air filters in homes.
I didn't hear you.
How do you feel about the use of air filters in homes?
I think air filters are great, especially for people who have, asthma and, and other respiratory problems. We just did a project in Wyandanch, which is a really, a really underserved community on the island. They have the highest asthma rates in the state, the most, which we know because they have the highest emergency room visits for asthma in New York State. So we did a project with them and looked at why that could be. We looked at outdoor air pollution, and they have two crematoriums, a human crematorium and a pet crematorium. They have a transfer station and a landfill, so there's a lot of truck traffic there. They have some other industries, and they have an industrial park there. So those are kind of out of their control, but they are in their community. And depending on the way the air is flowing, it really is impacting not only their outdoor air, but if they have windows open, it's coming into their homes. But more importantly, they're using things like air fresheners, these plug-in air fresheners. They're using things like Febreze. They're using scented candles. They have carpeting in their homes instead of hardwood floors or linoleum floors, and that carpeting is outgassing, many, many chemicals. These are the things that we're trying to just at least educate the community about. Pets are problematic for air quality in homes. Cats way more than dogs. Cats are very allergenic. Dogs are typically not so. And there are things like insect control. Cockroaches are very allergenic. And dust. I mean, people don't, they don't vacuum with HEPA filters. HEPA filters are really good things to have when you're vacuuming. They cost a little bit more money, but it is really worth it. And then instead of airing your home out by opening your windows on a nice, breezy day, they just use an air freshener. Or spray something around. And the other thing is cleaning products, which also impact indoor air quality, and personal care products, so it's really an education. I mean, they're just using so many chemicals inside their home. So I really believe in air filters, but you have to do all those other things too to eliminate the source of the problem.
How effective are the charcoal Brita filters?
Charcoal filters, can be pretty effective. The problem with them is that they're block filters, carbon block filters, and if you understand water, the path that water takes, it will always take the path of least resistance. So they'll only be effective for a short amount of time until the water starts channeling through that carbon block. It's not taking out contaminants that it's not taking out fluoride. Of course, we don't have fluoride on Long Island, which is great. But it's not taking out chemicals or pharmaceuticals that we might have in the water that our water departments are not taking care of. It'll take out chlorine though, and it'll taste better. And taking out chlorine is not a bad thing to do. Yes.
So you say plastic water bottles contaminate water, but also that our water supply is being contaminated by groundwater and all that. So is there really any safe water to drink, or are we just choosing the lesser of two evils?
That's a really good question. We always tell people if you're really interested in a pure water supply, which you should be, we recommend either reverse osmosis systems, or we recommend a structured matrix system, which will really, take almost everything out of that water, but not the minerals, which are the things that you want in the water. I think that our water here on Long Island, if you compare us to the rest of the country, is pretty good. I mean, having these aquifers, which are pretty much protected, as opposed to New York City's water, which is in open surface waters like reservoirs and lakes, where they're not protected from pesticide drift and from runoff from roads and so on. We have pretty good water here on Long Island. We really do, and it's really in our best interest to try to protect that water. So I think that if you're in a good place like Stony Brook, they probably have a really good water department. And I would think, other than the taste of chlorine, which a lot of people don't like, I think that your tap water is every bit as safe as bottled water, unless the bottled water is, extra filtered or, has been, gone through a reverse osmosis process. Yes?
You mentioned that you don't shop at normal grocery stores, so which stores do you shop at and what else would you recommend?
Well, it depends on what department you're talking about, but I eat a lot of vegetables and grains and those kinds of things. So I will. First of all, my daughter is she's an architect. She's married to an organic farmer. They live out in Jamesport. So we have a steady source of organic vegetables, seasonal, local organic vegetables. We also have a big garden in our backyard. I do a lot of cooking, which means that that I'm making things like soups. It's one of the most important things that you learn to do is to make soup. It's so easy to do. It's inexpensive, it's incredibly healthy, and it's something that everybody needs to do. I mean, I was talking to somebody last night whose wife is dying of uterine cancer. And he said she's lost 25 pounds and she doesn't want to eat anything. And I said, so are you making soup for her? And he said, I don't know. We never made soup. We don't know how to cook. We just buy food already made. And it's like, we really need to learn how to take care of ourselves, to be a little bit more self-sufficient. It's really important to know how to cook. Because you can cook. I mean, I cook all organic. Everything is organic. And I'm sure I spend less money than probably some of you if we were just doing, one-on-one. Just because I cook it, I don't buy stuff that's prepared. But I do shop at Whole Foods Market. I shop at Trader Joe's. You have to be selective. You want to buy things that are organic. It's always best if you can find local things because they're usually cheaper than something that's been imported. And dairy products are very important to buy organically because both dairy, poultry, and the meat industry use heavy amounts of hormones as well as antibiotics and other drugs. And so if you're going to buy anything that's organic, I would buy your protein supplies organically, which would be your eggs, dairy, meat, and poultry. Absolutely, because you don't want those extra drugs or hormones in it.
About the USDA certification or even say Whole Foods with their meat products, because I know that I know a few local farmers that I have a friend that works with local farmers that produce meat, for example a pig farm, that they're trying to sell their meat, and Whole Foods has their way of selling meat is that they sell you their livestock, and then once you take you have to go by their rules and regulations to raise them, and then often when they're ready to be butchered, they're sent off somewhere else. So that idea of localized meat is kind of taken away because Whole Foods has this sort of regulation set on the kind of meat that they're going to sell. And I know that USDA organics, or certified organics aren't necessarily, they have their own rules and regulations that, it kind of takes away from organic farming. Do you have any comments for the...
Well, there's different levels of organic. The USDA organic standard, you have 3 different levels. One is 100% organic, where you can use the organic label, and then I think the other one is like 75% or 80% organic. You can still use the organic label. But they don't actually have a label for other things other than food. I mean, you can buy organic personal care products, but there's no organic label on them. Now, it's a little confusing what you were talking about, because every store, like for instance Whole Foods Market, can set their own rules and standards for the produce or the meat products that they're going to buy. There is a standard in every state, like New York State has NOFA, the Northeast Organic Farming Association, which has an organic standard. And so any meat or produce that's grown in New York State, if you want to be certified organic, you have to follow the standards or the rules of NOFA. In other states, it's a different organic standard or a different organization. It is hard. It's hard to know a lot of things, especially if you're buying from like somebody who's just raising pigs, and they're trying to do it right, and they bought organic feed, but who's actually stamping it and certifying it? I don't know. You can't really rely on it. You can't really rely on it because there's so many complicating factors there, like where you send it to be butchered. Who are they butchering before the meat that you're sending, the animals that you're sending?
Emily? Hi. A lot of the fixes that you've mentioned, like buying organic and agriculture, whatever, are all like the more expensive option. I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, for people of lower socioeconomic status, these options aren't really options at all. Not to mention, these people are generally like working more, they don't have as much time to focus on taking actions against the sort of environmental injustices that are happening towards them. I was wondering if you could comment on that, because it seems like the toxics movement is very much a middle upper class movement.
Well, let's talk about that in two parts. Okay, first of all, you have to make your choices about what it is that's important to you, where you want to spend your time and your resources. You can actually cook organically cheaper than you can cheaper than buying conventional food that's prepackaged and processed. Like, for instance, frozen meals. Okay, you can actually make soup with organic ingredients that's cheaper than buying a little thing of frozen lasagna. I mean, it's possible. We actually we're working with Columbia University. They had a program, and we took 3 weeks, and we made up a menu for every meal for 3 weeks, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, using only organic, only fresh vegetables and grains and good high-quality proteins. And all we had was food stamps. That was all we had, so it was $37 a week at that time. So for $37, we were able to do 21 meals, okay, of the highest quality food, but you had to cook. That's where the tire meets the whatever, the road. That's where you have to be able to cook. You can't just go out and buy something. And you're right. Then the second part of that is this an environmental justice issue? Yeah, I mean, it really is an environmental justice issue. There are a lot of people that are living in these really underserved communities that, like you say, are just going out and working, and they really just don't have time to do any of these things, and they certainly don't have time to become activists on these issues, nor do they have time to even learn about it. And in many cases, they're the most affected. Their children are the most affected. They are most affected because they're in jobs where they're being exposed to toxic chemicals, and there are fewer controls, and so on and so on. So environmental justice is a very, very big area of concern. And we hear from people all the time. We're working with a woman in Mississippi right now who lives in a predominantly African American community, and they're living in a community that was built on top of a toxic landfill. And there's a tremendous amount of cancer and autoimmune disease in the community, and what can they do about it? It's very tough. It's very, very tough. I mean, basically, we're recommending at this point, because we've been working with them for about 6 months, and we've gotten legal help for them and everything else, we're basically recommending that if they have the means, and if they have family members in other parts of the country or other parts of the state, that they literally leave, if that's at all possible. So yeah, environmental justice issues are big. They usually put, manufacturing plants and transfer stations and landfills and so on in areas where people don't have the money or the resources, the personal resources to do anything about it. So, yes.
I just am wondering what your comments are on the United States, burden of proof chemical manufacturing policy as compared to a better run policy like the REACH program in the European Union, whereas they a chemical can't be manufactured until it's proven that it's safe. I'm just wondering what your comments are on that, and what could be done, I guess.
Well, she asked about whether or not, this country was ever going to go in the direction of some of the other countries where they are saying that the manufacturer has to prove that a chemical is safe before it is put on the market, as opposed to the way we do it here, where the consumer has to fight and try to prove that a chemical is actually doing harm after it's already on the market. And so it's called shifting the burden of proof to the manufacturer of the toxic chemical or the dangerous industrial process, or for whatever it is you're talking about. And we just have such an incredibly powerful chemical industry lobby in this country that basically pays for the campaigns of our politicians, who are now all in their pockets, that it almost seems like it's impossible, except for public opinion. I mean, that's the only thing that's more powerful than industry lobbyists is public opinion. It's the only thing, which means that people have to become educated and they have to change the supply and demand in this country. You demand safer products and the industry will supply them, but if you don't demand them, they're just going to keep throwing that toxic stuff at you that they make as cheaply as possible so that their profit margin, is as positive as it can be for their shareholders. And that's really where we are. We're living in a country that understands money and where the economy is everything, not public health. Public health is way down on the list.
I wanted to just get your practical sense as an activist and somebody working with a variety of communities about what it's like. You talk about wide edge and underserved communities, so that's a part of your sort of panorama of communities that you're involved in. How different is it to bring your message to an underserved community versus a middle class, upper middle class? What is your experience as an activist in just the basic difference in receptiveness, what messages you try to bring across, what works? I'm just interested in sort of generalizing a little bit.
Okay, so let's talk about Wine Dance because that's a current project of ours, and it really is an underserved community, primarily African American community. And with some Creole, we've actually translated the brochure that we've done for the community into Creole, and we are working in a community where these kids that we are engaging with in the middle school and the high school are really, they're suffering from many personal issues, single parent families. Parents who are both working, maybe two jobs, and so they're really living kind of by themselves. These kids, in many cases, they're kind of on their own. They are eating school meals, which are provided for them. They have breakfast and lunch at school every day. So we really can't talk to them about, good nutrition and how you start your day. You should start your day with, some protein and, and so on. And that's the most important meal of the day, which it is for our bodies, our breakfast. We really can't talk to them about those things because they are part of a system that is very different from an upper class community, let's say the North Shore of the island. Where parents can run out to Whole Foods or to stop at the local deli and buy their kids scrambled eggs and whole wheat toast and a thing of organic orange juice. I mean, that doesn't happen in these communities. So those are the kinds of things that we can't do, and there are big differences there. But we've also found that in those communities, and I know this is a really interesting thing, and we're trying to figure out why, is that the advertising for things like Febreze and plug-in, whatever these are, these plug-in air fresheners that every time you walk by them they puff and something, or I don't know what they are, but I mean there seems to be, everybody wants them. They want to have them. Anything that they see advertised, they really want to have it, and they don't really understand that that it's really not, it's not healthy. They don't have housekeepers like kids in the North Shore. They don't have housekeepers that come in and keep their homes clean. And their parents are tired and, because they're working two jobs or they only have a single parent, or maybe there are a couple of generations living in the same home. Maybe they're being raised by their grandparents. I mean, it is very different. It's very different. We are most impressed by the really poor nutrition. These kids really are generally more overweight. They have diabetes, they have asthma. As you know, that's why we started this program there. So there are more health problems that they are dealing with every single day. And because of that, because of their personal situation, which is primarily an economic one and a family, unit problem, these other problems are less important to them. They're more in survival mode than they are in becoming, active in their communities to make them safer places. And yet these are the communities which need it the most. It's frustrating.
So I just have a question about solutions.
About what?
Solutions. Because I feel like I don't know how you all think, but you go to these talks and you hear this really difficult information. What do we do? You know, what's the answer? And so I'd love for you to answer that, but I also wanted Corey to say something about, we went to your events with that you organized with Doc Spencer and the anti-fracking legislation of the bringing in the waste. And I just would you just say what that was like for you as a student? So Corey's a student here, and I grabbed her last semester, well, give you an option. Patti asked me to come and speak because as a director, who was an important voice at the legislature to say something about it. And I offered it up to a few students. I said, do you want to come see what happens in the political, the real world? You know, how does this stuff happen? And so you were dying to know, right? So if you could say what that was like.
Well, yes, it was the hearing where we went and spoke about the importation of fracking waste into Suffolk County. It's kind of nerve-wracking to speak in front of a bunch of officials that you, on these things that you're very passionate about, but you're still learning and you don't have, all the facts. I mean, you have them, but it's hard to keep up as a student with all the other things you're doing. But I think just going out there and being a youth in this sort of fight and this movement is one of the most impacting things because we are the voice of the future. I mean, we are the voices now, but I don't know, I think just being there and being heard. My voice was shaking. It's not like I was going to cry the whole entire time I spoke in front of that at that hearing, so it wasn't too impressive on my part, but I think being there in general.
Yeah, and so I've never done it before, so for me it was scary too. It wasn't like I was spoken in front of a group of politicians at a hearing, and it was challenging, but Patti was really great. So you have support, and you assume everybody knows everything. So one of the things that you all did, you were very well prepared in terms of providing information for speakers about the fracking waste, what was in it, what the materials were that were dangerous, why we should be concerned, and then we were asked to sort of put together our own statements based on these facts. So it was really very helpful. And then they were so impressed with us coming. They were impressed with students. Farmers came, your daughter's a farmer, other farmers came. They were, it was very interesting. And you saw, it was a learning experience for me throughout the day. There were other issues on the docket. So there was a dog thing, something about breeding.
Puppy mills.
Puppy mills, what's going on? But so people have these various causes, but the good thing was to say, gee, you can have your cause and you can get involved civically and you can actually make a difference. So for us, it was so incredible because I've been doing this sort of teaching and activism for years, and you hope it's going to work and you keep doing it. Within 24 hours, it went through.
Yeah, and it was unanimous vote. Both Republican and Democrats voted unanimously in both Suffolk and Nassau County, which was really great. But I mean, there was a lot of preparation for this. Every single legislator in both Nassau and Suffolk County had a packet of scientific information on the health impacts, on the groundwater impacts, particularly for Long Island, on air quality issues, on road spreading and how that will impact land use, especially agricultural use here on Long Island, agricultural land use. And so they had all the information, and they may not have read it all, but certainly their legislative assistants read it, somebody on their staff read it, and they all unanimously said, who's going to argue with this? We're going to say no. No, we can't do it. So we are a science-based organization. That's one of the things that we've been able to do. We take this legislation that passed in Suffolk and Nassau County, and then we go to Orange County. Then we go to Albany County, where they already have legislation, but they haven't addressed landfills yet. So we go in and we get them to address landfills so that every single county has a comprehensive ban on fracking waste. We're basically just kind of, undermining Governor Cuomo's, ability to really move forward here. Because he's going to wind up with a state where there's not a single county that will allow the fracking waste into their county. And so then what's he going to do with it? Pennsylvania's already, moving their stuff, into Ohio and West Virginia. So it's this very, very, slow but steady progress on the local level that makes the difference. And that's what you all have to do. I mean, I really hope that you really think carefully about your cell phone use. It's an enormously important issue right now. You're actually the first generation that's going to really, see the impact of this. You're going to see the impact when you're in your 30s and your 40s. You're going to see a lot of your friends who are going to have issues. We're already seeing people, but you're going to see a lot of friends. Yeah.
Do you think that how much we've already used our cell phones and everything, like, are we already at risk of damaging, like, our future children? Like, all of us are going to, like, how is our families in, like, 10 years? Do you think that what we've already put ourselves through with wireless radiation, that, like, it's, if we stop now, we'll be free of risk?
Yes. It's always good to stop now. The body is a remarkable organism, and it has a remarkable ability to repair itself. For instance, if you are you are someone who's had a lot of radiation, and let's say you're a woman and you've had radiation to your ovaries, and you had some eggs damaged. If and when you get pregnant, your body will self-select the undamaged eggs. It's an amazing thing. So it's never too late. I always say that to everybody. It's never too late. As long as you support your body with, proper nutrition and, rest and exercise. And I know those things sound incredibly, boring because you've heard them your entire life, but they're really, really important. And just be very, very careful about your exposure moving forward. I'm not going to say that that it's too late. You've already done the damage, and there's nothing you can do about it. Yeah.
So there are ways to prevent future exposure from radiation, especially wireless radiation. Is there any ways we can help get it out of our bodies?
Help get it out of your bodies? Well, it's actually not in your body right now. It actually is very short-lived. It's not like gamma radiation from an exposure to radioactive elements from a nuclear power plant. Those actually get into your body, into your organs, like cesium and some other radioactive materials. They'll find homes in your thyroid and in other organs and so on. This is a different type of radiation. This radiation, will damage, like for instance, in the brain, it will actually block calcium channels in the brain. And if you look at MRIs of a child and a teenager and a young adult holding a cell phone against your ear, you'll see that in the child, that the radiation will go completely across the brain. And in the teenager, it'll go across about, 3/4, and in an adult, it'll go about halfway across your brain. Because a child has a thinner skull, and and they have a smaller brain, and so it's not the type of radiation like gamma radiation that is going to stay inside your body, but it does do damage, and over time it will accumulate the damage that's being done. Yes.
Yeah. I'm hearing this stuff about the cell phones, and I'm remembering the controversy over electromagnetic radiation, the towers and so on, that there was such a big deal about it. And
you mean like power lines?
The power lines, right.
Yeah, power lines for electrical.
But they were, so there was a lot of suggestive evidence, but no real smoking gun, it turned out. How is the evidence about cell phones different from that?
Well, first of all, there's a lot more of it. And secondly, the exposure is ubiquitous. So we're all being exposed, and there are only so many people who are living under a big power line. Okay, and the only real smoking gun there was that children living closer to those lines had a higher incidence of leukemia. That was the only thing that we really had that was solid for the electromagnetic fields coming off those power lines. This is very different because we're exposed to it at such close proximity, and it's almost constant, the exposure.
Well, what about the science?
Oh, the science on it. If you want to look at the bioinitiative report, if you want to write this down, I mean, who wants to look at it because it's like, it's like 10 inches high. But the bioinitiative report, which gets updated periodically, is just this document of all of the science from all over the world on electromagnetic radiation. Bioinitiative report.
That's not, I was just looking online.
Yes. And it's not environmental working group. It's actually put together by a whole group of scientists: Joel Moskowitz, David Carpenter, Cindy Sage, Dr. Magda Havas. I mean, and researchers from all over the world. Hardell from Sweden. I mean, there's a lot. Leonard Hardell. There are people who are giants in this field, who continue to do this independent research on this, who are just coming up with more and more smoking guns on it. We don't usually, even put our foot in the water unless we think we have enough science behind it that we feel, real comfortable about. And all we're doing right now is we're just using the precautionary principle, which is if there's an indication of harm, that we're going to tell people that, to take precaution even though we don't have scientific certainty. I mean, you'll have people, huh?
This is not cigarettes.
No, this is not cigarettes. But we're saying that cigarettes. You still have scientists who say that there's no proof that cigarettes cause lung cancer. You still have scientists who will actually say that today. No proof. Science is this very elusive thing. Scientific certainty. Because you can design studies any way you want, and it depends on who's funding those studies, and it depending on what the results are of those studies, whether or not they get published or not, and that's determined by who funded those studies, who's holding the bag of money.
Well, yeah, I think we've got to look at the balance of science.
Yeah. But I think that we're stepping into a territory with wireless radiation that, we really don't have any answers. Nobody is actually coming out and saying that it's safe. Nobody's saying that it's safe, so...
They're saying it's not proven to be unsafe. That's what the...
Yeah, well, that's where who's saying that? Who's saying that? The National Institute... No, not NIEHS, but the CDC...
No, that's the statement.
CDC, the Centers for Disease Control. Okay, the World Health Organization has labeled it as a 2B carcinogen, which means that it is likely to cause cancer. So that has been labeled by IARC, the International Agency on... Huh? That is a 2B carcinogen, that has been labeled by IARC, which is the International Agency on Research for Cancer, which is an arm of the World Health Organization. The wireless industry controls the research all over the world on this. And so you have to be very careful about how you read those studies and what your thinking is after you have read those studies. When you have to know where the money came from. The independent research is really good. Look up Joel Moskowitz's site. He's at UC Berkeley. Joel Moskowitz, Moskowitz. Dr. Joel Moskowitz. He's the head of the School of Public Health at Berkeley. And he's got a really, really good database on his site of independent science on this, which you'll probably find very interesting. Yeah. And the bioinitiative report. Yes?
We're talking about time and how this can cause poisoning in babies and all that. I was wondering, is there something out there that we can use that is safe to wash our clothes?
Oh, you were talking about Tide. You mean laundry detergents?
Yeah.
Yeah, laundry detergents fall into the same category as personal care products, which is where you're looking for a bio-based laundry detergent. If you want to know specific brands, there are brands like BioClean, which is BIO-KLEAN or KLEEN. Seventh Generation is another manufacturer. Ecover, which is the one I really like. It's made in Belgium. ECOVER. And when these products are on sale, they're the same price as what you would pay for Tide or All or any of the other petrochemical cleaning products in a regular grocery store. But you can get these at Whole Foods Market, but get them when they're on sale. I always do. That's I never spend full price for them because they are a little bit more expensive. But we also use too much of them. You're only supposed to use one little thing. Everyone uses one and then maybe another one because my clothes are really dirty. Maybe another one to make them look cleaner. So just use them carefully, and it's cheaper that way. Done? Anybody else? Have I made your day? Your evening?
Well, we have to talk about John.
You have to talk about John Wargo. Yeah, you lost some of your class.
Back and break and come back and do John Wargo.
Thank you.